We're specifically looking at the Caribbean now, a very diverse region. It's often lumped together as just the Caribbean, but it obviously is made up of various island states. Where does insurance fit into the scenario in the Caribbean, a region that does suffer across the board hurricanes and other climatic effects?
Yeah, I guess it's probably important to first to give you an idea of the context that we're dealing with. And rightfully, as you said, it's a very diverse region, and that's not necessarily the picture that we get when we think of the Caribbean. It's also a region that's highly exposed to natural hazards. Apart from earthquakes, you have extreme exposures to hydrometeorological events such as hurricanes, extreme rainfall, drought. So all these are natural hazards that affect us, and the expectation is that those events will be exacerbated as a result of climate change. But there are also certain peculiarities which define the Caribbean region. They are small islands with tiny economies. They're also physically small in terms of their size. They also tend to have high debt. So when you have a hurricane passing through the region and it goes over an entire country, we're talking about sometimes 200% in terms of damage to GDP. And we can compare that to the experience of, say, the United States and Hurricane Katrina, where the losses there barely registered in terms of the impact on the state and impact on the wider economy of the United States. So it's a very different experience that we have in the Caribbean as it relates to the vulnerabilities which we experience.
I mean, why would an insurance company get involved in the Caribbean knowing that it's susceptible to things like hurricanes which cause the devastation you've just been talking about? In a way, the simple question is, what's in it for them?
Okay, there are a number of reasons why insurance companies tend not to be actively involved in terms of, or the penetration rate, for example, is not as extensive in developing countries as opposed to most developed countries. And yes, one could be the high exposures. We're also talking about markets where there needs to be greater education of the population in terms of the role that insurance itself can play in terms of heightening the resilience of communities.
Simply because people are not aware of the concept of the existence of insurance?
No, part of it is that in terms of greater education, but part of it is that there's also, I think, some level of apprehension by the market in terms of getting involved at that scale. And we're also talking about the small markets within the Caribbean. So there are a number of factors that have to do with that. Or if insurance is available, it tends to be very expensive and out of the reach of the people who are most vulnerable. So that's another factor that we need to keep in mind.
So how do you go about trying to, well, first of all, educate people in all different parts of the Caribbean about how insurance could benefit them and benefit the wider economy, presumably?
Okay. Well, I guess we can look at it in two ways. I work for an organization called, or I work with a company which is the facility supervisor for what is known as the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility. And this is really an insurance fund for 16-member governments. And it came about simply because the governments recognized that there was a problem in terms of them being able to mobilize resources to actually undertake their recovery and redevelopment efforts after a disaster occurred. And so they came up with this mechanism where they could pool their risks amongst multiple countries to actually access the reinsurance markets and transfer some of that so that when something happens, there could be some guarantee of funds available. So that's a recognition at the governmental level, at the macro level, of the role that insurance plays in terms of heightening the resilience and improving the capacity of countries to respond. But as I indicated, there is a lack of microinsurance at the micro level, at the individual level. And we all know that these events translate into individual impacts. And part of the evolution of the facility is to try to find ways in which we can make microinsurance available at that scale. And so we've partnered with a number of very capable agencies such as the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative, MicroInsure, which is the largest microinsurance organization in the world. They operate largely in Africa and Asia, as well as Munich Re, to see what are the, number one, risks that the low-income people within the Caribbean face, primarily within the agricultural sector, tourism sector, the construction sector, but to also find out what is it that we can do and where are the best positions in which, or the best points in which insurance can be made available. And when we do this, we have to be careful that whatever we do is appropriate, is affordable, it can operate within a regulatory framework that works for the people and that it does what it's supposed to do. And it's convenient as well, and there are no extensive bureaucracies in terms of the access that low-income people can actually have to these mechanisms.
And where have you found are the best places to apply them?
Yes, what we found is that a lot of the low-income groups within the countries which we have undertaken undertaking this study tend to prefer or have interactions with things like cooperatives. For example, you will find them leaning towards an agricultural cooperative, such as maybe a sugarcane cooperative or a banana cooperative or something like that, or credit unions as well. But you also have a Caribbean region where you do have a fairly well-developed banking system. But there has been a problem because the banks themselves have not necessarily wanted to engage the farming community as much because they recognize the risks that are involved in that, in terms of the weather exposures that those communities face. So our work is to really try to find what ways can we work with those institutions where low-income people already have some level of interaction with them to make microinsurance available in order to support their livelihoods.